Hello, welcome to my bookshelf. Today I'm really excited to share with you all the books that I read in the month of March. If you watched my March TBR, you'll know that I wanted to read 6 books. And I actually did one better and read 7 books. So I'm really pumped. I'm really excited that I actually meet my goal. I was not expecting to at all. So I made a similar goal next month, which you can see in my next video. But on to the books that I read in the month of March. So let's get started. The first 2 books that I read are actually the 2 books that come after Divergent, Insurgent and Allegiant. I read these on audiobook, so I don't actually have a copy of the book, but we're just going to hold up Divergent for this because I actually finished the series. I wasn't expecting to read Allegiant. That's the one book that I read that was extra on my TBR. So I have kind of mixed feelings about the series as a whole. It went into a completely different direction than I was expecting. I think it brought up a lot of interesting, good issues that, need to be talked about in our world and our culture, but I just think, especially in Allegiant, that those themes just didn't have enough time to really develop. And so I just thought that the series as a whole kind of suffered from that. So more specifically, I gave Insurgent 2 stars. I kind of found it boring. And I don't know if this is because I listened to the audiobook or not, but it just seemed like not a whole lot happened. And what did happen was mainly like action sequences. I have a hard time reading action sequences. I have a hard time, I guess, visualizing it, which sounds weird because it's an action scene, but my brain just doesn't work that way. And so I had a really hard time. I normally kind of just skim over, to an extent, action sequences in books. But because I was listening to it, I was forced to actually hear the whole fight. That probably had something to do with why I didn't like this book. But that's kind of a me problem and not the book, I guess. But I just thought that the writing itself wasn't that good either. Triss comes off as very, very childish and kind of annoying, actually, in Insurgent. There's actually a scene in Insurgent where she's doing that really annoying thing that, 10-year-olds do, maybe even younger, where they just, copy what you're saying back to them. If you've ever seen a little kid do that, it's so annoying. And to have a 16-year-old do it is, really just obnoxious. Allegiant got better. I thought that the story went into some interesting places. I actually enjoyed the ending, which might be an unpopular opinion. I actually give Veronica Roth a lot of props for kind of sticking with the ending that she had. I appreciated it, and I actually thought that it fit really well for the story. I actually liked the natural ending of the book better than the epilogue. I didn't think the epilogue needed to be there. I felt like things were finalized and completed by the end of the natural book, I guess, if you will. I mean, the epilogue was interesting because it kind of tells you what happens to the characters after the story, but I didn't need it. I think it was interesting because it's always interesting to read about these characters again and find out more about them, but I didn't need it, to be honest. So overall, I think I would give the series a 3 stars. Divergent is probably my favorite of the series. I really think that it's an interesting premise. So the only reason, actually, why I still have a copy of Divergent is because I have the German version. And I'm trying to learn German, and I really need this to help me translate this. So that's the only reason why I still own it. I will say Divergent was my favorite, so I will be kind of excited to reread that at some point to understand the German version. Okay, so the next book that I read in March was Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. It takes place in Russia. The plot of the story is that our main character, Raskolnikov, he's a former student, and he's very poor. He's living in this extremely, it's not even really an apartment, it's just a room. They mention how small it is over and over again, so it's pretty small. And he commits a crime, as the title implies. It's a serious crime. It's not like he stole candy from a candy store, which is stealing, but not a huge deal. He actually does a serious crime, which I'm not going to tell you what he did because I feel like that kind of ruins the book a little bit. So anyway, he commits a crime, and he commits a crime pretty early on, within the first like third of the book. The rest of the book is all about punishment. So it's all about kind of even his own like mental punishment, you know, just of worrying about the punishment is kind of punishment, if that makes sense. The first about half of the book is told strictly from the main character's point of view. We're only getting his perspective of the events that are happening. We're getting his thoughts and feelings, you know, before, during, and after this crime. And so that's really interesting to read. It's kind of hard to read almost at times too, just because he's not in the right state of mind. I mean, he is committing these crimes, so. But anyway, the second half of the book, you start to venture off into other people's point of views, other people that are in his life. And sometimes actually our main character isn't even in the scene. It's just like these two side characters talking to each other. Sometimes about him, but sometimes not. It also had a very interesting ending. I was not expecting it to go that way, you know, from the first half. I don't know where I was expecting it to go, but once it started to go in that direction, and again, these things are slowly done. Everything's kind of drawn out, but I thought it in a good way. I don't know. I really liked the writing style of this. There were some scenes that I thought were way longer than they need to be, especially in the beginning, which was kind of frustrating as a reader, but it was done really well, I thought. So I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. Okay, so the next book that I read is also a serious topic, but I promise the next 2 books after this are very lighthearted and we'll end on a happy note, don't worry. And that's Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Now, this was an excellent, excellent book. Again, it was kind of hard to read, not because of its length, actually the opposite, it's very short, but just the content. So the first half of this book is Frankl's memoir, more or less, of his experience in the concentration camps. That was really hard to read just because of the horrors that happened in those camps, which I think we're all aware of. To read another person's story who went through that, it's hard to read, but it's good to read. It's good to know what happened, what these people actually went through. I mean, everyone's experience at the camps is gonna be different. And so it is really interesting to read his perspective. Viktor Frankl is a psychiatrist, and he had developed this idea of logotherapy before he went into the camps. The camps actually kind of gave him an opportunity to test out his theory. And logotherapy is just therapy that helps the client find meaning in their lives. And because they find meaning in their lives, they're able to go on with their lives. He uses the theory that he developed before he went into the camps, in the camps, to kind of see if this is actually helpful in practice. And Viktor Frankl did find that to be true. But there were some people that died but weren't, you know, attacked or anything or gassed. They just lost hope. The hope that they lost is kind of like the hope that there was meaning in their lives, that this suffering had purpose. Frankl argues that there is meaning even in their suffering. It's not meaningless. There's a reason to live. So either way, I mean, it's hard to explain this. It's just a really good book. It talks about some hard issues, but I also think that this book does bring a lot of hope. I found this to be an excellent book, just overall. But it should be something that is read slowly. It shouldn't be read all in one sitting. It's something that needs to be slowly digested. And it's just an excellent book. I highly recommend it. Okay, so the next book that I read is something a lot more lighthearted. I had to read this after Man's Search for Meaning. So the next book that I read in the month of March is The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. This was a really nice book to read after Man's Search for Meaning because that was such a deep, probing, powerful, emotional book. And this is very lighthearted, but it also actually raises some interesting points that kind of go align with the last book. And actually, Viktor Frankl is mentioned in this book, so that's kind of a fun fact. So this book, more or less, is Gretchen Rubin's Happiness Project. So she describes how she came up with this idea. She does research on happiness, you know, what makes us happy, what doesn't. So she's a very organized person. So she comes up with a theme for every month that she's going to work on. So, you know, 1 month is her marriage, 1 month is her kids, 1 month is work, 1 month is just boosting her energy, you know, things like that. And she goes through, you know, every month has its like overarching theme, and then there's goals underneath that that try to meet that goal. This goes through each month and, you know, what her goals were and how they actually went in practice and what she learned from that month, you know, as a part of her happiness project. So this book I thought was really well written, but I really like that she's able to admit her faults, but more importantly, to work on them. And that's what this whole book is about. I just thought that this was a fantastic idea. I really liked reading about it, though some sections don't apply to me. I am not married, sadly, and I don't have kids, also sadly. So those sections didn't have as much meaning to me personally, but I still was able to read them and get something out of it, even if it wasn't for me specifically. So I found this to be a really fun, easy read. I would really like to implement some of these things in my own life, and it really made me think about what kind of goals I would have and how it would look differently from Gretchen's. So I really like the concept of this book, and I'm excited to, I don't know if I would go full on out like she did with, you know, a resolutions chart where you're marking it every day and things like that, but I do think that I want to take things that were brought up in this book and implement them in my own life. Okay, so the last book that I read in the month of March is Ishara. It was originally written by Douglas Adams as a script for the Doctor Who show, but it was turned into a novel by Gareth Roberts. Now, if you're not familiar, Doctor Who is a British sci-fi TV show. It is amazing, by the way. You should definitely watch it. They rebooted it, I believe, in 2005, and it's been going strong ever since. But the fun thing about this is that this one takes place in the era of this doctor, the one with the long scarf. So I was really excited to read a book about that doctor because I didn't grow up with him. You know, the doctors I know are over here. And so it was really fun to get an older era doctor. I found it to be in the spirit of just Doctor Who in general, which is why I like this show. They have different actors playing these doctors. They all have their own personalities, but they still have this underlying like quirkiness to them that is just really fun to read and watch. And it also goes really well with Douglas Adams' writing style in general. So when I found out that he used to be a writer for Doctor Who and that this was a book, I was just so happy to read it. And I don't know, it was just a lot of fun. It's not some lofty literature, but it's just a really fun read, which is the whole point of reading, right? Honestly, if you're not a Doctor Who fan, you probably won't like this book. I don't think that it would be as fun for a non-Doctor Who fan. Basically, it's an episode of Doctor Who, and so I don't really want to say much about the plot. I mean, that's all you really need to know. If you're a Doctor Who fan, you should read this book. If you're not, you should watch the show, then read this book. Anyway, it's such a fun read. If you like Doctor Who, you're gonna get a kick out of it. So, it was a lot of fun to read. Okay, so those were all the books that I read in the month of March. I was actually really surprised that I completed my goal because 2 days ago, I still had 3 books left to finish. I was about halfway through in them, but it was kind of overwhelming, and I was like, can I do this? But then I saw that the weekend was coming up, and since I didn't have anything else going on, instead of spending my weekend on YouTube or Netflix, I was like, this is a good chance to read. So that's what I did, and I actually finished the last book 11 o'clock at night last night. Okay, I'm realizing last minute that I forgot one book because I didn't have a physical copy of it because I lent it from the library. And that is Scarlet, so I would hold it up if I had it, but I don't. It's the second book in the Lunar Chronicles, and if you're not familiar, the Lunar Chronicles, they're fairy tale retellings set in the future, so there's cyborgs and robots and things like that. It's a really fun series. I actually liked Scarlet better than Cinder, which is the first book in this series. I'm not going to say a whole lot about it because, one, I can't hold anything up, so it's kind of boring for you, but I have reviews on my channel for Cinder and Scarlet. So check out those reviews in the description below. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know what you think of the books in the comments. And until next time,